Welcome to Through the Lens, stories, life lessons, and musings with Amanda LaChapelle and guests. This is a podcast for taking a moment to dive into the most random stories and topics about life, art, and the world we live in. So I introduced in the last episode, kind of what we'd be doing here, and just to kind of go over it, it will never have a true rhyme or reason. There'll be, things that are in my head that I want to talk about, and there'll be people that I want to talk about that with for many different reasons. But the goals of this podcast is to kind of just get a chance to talk with other people who maybe share a similar value that I do, maybe have something in common with me, or that I feel like other people could identify with. And then maybe hear from their perspective and get to know a little bit about how they see things. And when I was considering what my first topic was going to be, I kind of had to choose something that was a little important to me, which would be ADHD. And when I thought about who I wanted to talk to about that, I was thinking about somebody that's actually inside the same space as I'm in, which is the MSP space. She works for a vendor, Imibot. Her name is Tara Rummer. Hi, Tara. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, I'm so excited to be here. Wait, am I really your first guest?
You are, yes.
I had no idea. Okay, that's awesome. Yay.
Yeah, I thought, when I was thinking about where to start, I was like, okay, this part is so important for people to understand from the jump, because as you know, talking to someone who has ADHD is a little bit like from here to there. So yeah.
We do not have ducks in a row. We have squirrels at a rave. That's like my thing. And they've got little glow sticks.
That's pretty good.
So they're having a great time, but you still have to push them back into order every so often.
I mean, we do what we do, right? So it's not much you can do to control it. Sometimes it works in your favor. Sometimes it goes where it needs to go. But I will say one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you first was because of the post that you're putting up on LinkedIn. The transparency, just about kind of your journey and what you were facing and just the different ways that it showed up for you was like, oh, you're already talking about this publicly, and that's not necessarily something that everybody wants to do. And I was like, okay, if we get a chance to talk about this might, amplify what you're trying to say as well, right? So
yeah, and I really appreciate it. It's been honestly, the reason I'm talking about it is because when I was diagnosed as an adult, nobody was talking about it. I did not know any adults that had been diagnosed. So I was like, this is weird. Like, what's going on? I thought this was a kid's thing.
Yeah. Or, rambunctious jumping around kids, right?
Yeah. And so that's me more as adult than as a kid. I'm way more energetic now.
I hear that. So what was it exactly that led you to go and go, okay, something is not, the way it should be, and look for a diagnosis?
So it was actually an ex-roommate of mine. She is a nurse and she also works in IT in a hospital. And we were talking one day and she's like, have you ever been diagnosed with ADD, ADHD? And I was like, nah, I'm good. And just kind of went on with my life. And a few years later, actually, my younger sister, she's 13 years younger than me, she was diagnosed with it. And I was like, oh, maybe my roommate had something there. Maybe I should look into it. Because at work, I was going from a very isolated position. I've worked for an MSP before we spun up Imibot called Immense Networks. And I was very isolated from everybody. I was working in the finance area and the admin area and building all of that. And then they transitioned me to a service manager role. I will scream from the rooftops. I am not technical, even though I'm a little bit technical. But from there, I wasn't doing those quick tasks anymore. It was more like, oh no, now you have to lead people and you have to build these longer processes and you have to balance all these personalities. And then it just kind of felt like something was off, I guess. Yeah. And I wasn't accomplishing enough, even though I was. I couldn't focus. So I was having these brain zaps. I'd be in the middle of a process and I'd be like, oh, I need to go work on this random thing over here. Why? I don't know.
Yeah, I can identify with that. It's the shiny thing, right?
Always.
For me, it's funny. It's not a sibling, because none of my siblings are diagnosed, although now that I have been, I question that, but that's the way of it when you get diagnosed with ADHD, right?
Yeah.
But it was my son. So my son got diagnosed first. And he was diagnosed early. It was very apparent. And as we started going through treatment and stuff, I kind of went, this feels like it could be me. It's not a big deal. And then I happened to be on ADHD Talk, because that's the way it goes also, on TikTok. And it would just constant videos of, oh, do you do this? Do you do this? And I'm like, okay, I hear you. I get it. Shut up. I'll go talk to somebody.
I thought that was just normal. I was like, "Oh, other people don't do that?" Like, I
Yeah,
said
well,
one
and
to my
that's the thing.
husband.
You don't realize, and I think too, like there's so many little things that you just chalk up to being your personality,
Yes.
and you just don't think, okay, no, this actually comes from something that's not wrong but different, right? That's not the traditional way, and it's kind of like this weird, I don't know, epiphany. I don't know. Maybe you tell me how you felt when you got the diagnosis. Like, what was running through your mind?
Well, so when I first got it, I actually laughed super hard. Because like comedy and just comic relief is kind of how I deal with things and self-deprecating and all of that. But my doctor, he and I are pretty close. His brother-in-law was actually in my wedding. Like Louisiana's a small place, but when I asked him about it, I was like, "Hey, do you think I could have ADHD?" And he's like, "Wait, you didn't know you had ADHD?" And
Oh,
I was like, literally, that's what came out of his mouth. And I was like, "Wait, what? What?" And he's like, "I thought you knew." And I was like, "No."
oh
So,
man.
so, I mean, it was at least a little funny. And then I guess I was a little relieved because I was starting to struggle so much at work. I thought something was wrong with me. And it wasn't wrong. It was just I was learning something new about myself and I had to adjust. And I guess from there, I mean, I don't know if you felt this way, but I was so confused because, like I said, I'd never met an adult that had been diagnosed with ADHD. And I actually asked my doctor if I was weird. And he's like, "No, no. I actually diagnosed a 45-year-old woman the other day, and women and girls are less likely to get diagnosed because our signs and symptoms show up differently than
Yeah,
males." So
yeah.
he's like, "You probably don't have the hyperactivity. You don't have these things that are like the typical signs." So
So when you
yeah.
think back through the lens of being a kid, though, like what was the, I'm going to talk about my reaction in a second, but I'm curious because we're
Yeah.
right there. What was your, when you look back now and think about it, like, could you see things that were different for you?
So while going through it, I would say no. I literally have the same best friend since 3rd grade. Maybe she's neurodivergent, I don't know, but we have very similar quirks. So I just always assumed I was just like her. I was always academically gifted, like nothing felt off. I've always been super scatterbrained though. But
Mm.
growing up, it was seen as like, "Oh, that's cute," or "That's funny. She can't remember things." But I mean, it's
No,
like
I get it. I mean, I get it.
like they
But
were my
like
quirks.
what gets attributed as cute to women is wild to me, but like
Yeah, it's insane. But as I got older and now looking back on it, because I mean, once I was diagnosed and once I started talking a lot more about it, I started reading a lot more and listening to a lot of audiobooks because I can't focus on reading a book for too long. Um, I do think there were differences that showed up, but they didn't show up in like a typical way, maybe.
yeah.
I was always the daydreamer, but at the time it was like, "Oh, what girl is not a daydreamer in junior high and high school? That's kind of who you are." But it was like a little excessive. And my memory has literally always been garbage. And then I went through chemo when I was in my early 20s, and then my memory was just like, "Nah, we're good. We're just gonna go away now. You're gonna
I don't want to
remember
laugh at
nothing."
that, but I get like it just something stressful and you kind of just do what you got to do to cope, right? Like
Literally, that's
you
what it
just
was.
compartmentalize and that's just not something I'm going to use right now, right?
Well, we don't need that in my life. But it's also, I guess it's a good thing too, because then you don't remember some of the terrible things that happened so much.
Yeah.
But for me growing up, I was always super creative and I was always very curious about the world. And so like I took every art class our schools offered. I was the TA in art for our art teacher in high school. And I was really good at like puzzles and patterns. And I didn't know that was also like kind of a sign that you notice things that other people maybe don't.
Yeah.
And I think it was really eye-opening. I know I'm getting a little off topic, but hey,
That's okay.
like I'm moving through my life here and in college. So I started college, and this is when it should have really been eye-opening for me and maybe for my family, is I started as a double major in accounting and international business. Like those are two very like
That's heavy.
methodical majors. I was so bored. I was just it was killing me because I wasn't getting to get my creative side out and my like curiosity out, right? I ended up changing. I thought my dad was going to kill me halfway through college to art history. So I have a degree in art history and then I have 2 minors in women's gender and sexuality studies and
Ooh,
literature. So like my dad was like, "You're doing what?" I'm like, it's feeding my soul and it's like filling that part of my brain that had a very large void, honestly.
almost like a niche, right? Like when you want to
Yeah.
learn about those things.
Yeah.
So, for me, my diagnosis came from a transition between working in weddings and working into tech. And, weddings are the space, I was a photographer. Weddings are the space where you create your entire world, and you you get to choose, your adventure, for lack of way to put it. And whenever you're shooting, you can follow the story, the emotion, whatever, and you get fed that way. And it's very linear, at least in my mind, the way that I see it. And I love doing that, but I really was burnt out. And then when I came into the world of tech, it's very like the same processes I would use to approach a wedding day is very similar to how I organize something when we're doing a big project, right? Getting all the details together and piecing it out. So for me, organizational stuff is not the stressful part. It's the then going and making other people execute it that can be a little bit more, because then you have to get buy-in and you have to deal with, I just want them to do it, right?
Yeah, and you have to the relying on other people. I don't know if
Yeah.
this is something with people with ADHD or not, but that's something I've struggled with. Is
Yeah.
like I can rely on myself, and I find it really hard to rely on other people. And I'm like, can't you just do this? And
Well, I
then
think
it's
it's because the way that they think isn't matched with yours. And there's a thing that you were saying before that's kind of very true for people who have ADHD is like the way that you see connections, the way that you see everything like a web over top of things is because you can be thinking about seven things at the same time. And that's very much what I was like as a kid. I would
yeah,
ask a question and then my next question would be something completely different. And I remember parents being like, How did you get there? Like where did you start and where did you get to?" I
mhm,
did love reading, but for me, reading was about it wasn't just reading. It was if I'm going to read about this character, I'm going to also be thinking about what they look like in the physical realm. I'm going to be thinking about like, what their thoughts and ideas and motivations might be. So like as I'm taking it in, I'm also thinking about all those other things. So my brain is getting, all these sensory inputs of things that I'm doing at the same time. So for me, it would feed me as well as music. Both of those things are, high. Also was super creative, was, doing art and all kinds of random projects and things. It's a really
well,
weird
we just
story,
found
but
out earlier we both were photographers. So
yeah.
like, who
I
knew?
think I think there's some industries that just lend itself to ADHD, but I remember feeling very like I had a really good group of friends, when I was in elementary school. I grew up in a very small town, and they loved me, but I always felt different. I always felt like somehow I didn't belong. Maybe I felt things too much, or I invested in things too much, like compared to other people. I would get hyper focused on things like how beautiful something would be, and they were looking at me like, Amanda, what's wrong with you? Like, why do you care what the horses look like I would see light on the horse's back and I would be like, I was there, I was in the moment, and they were looking at me like I was wild.
And your
And
friends are
I'm kind
like,
of
please
glad that
God,
they
get on the saddle and just ride the horse. Like, let's not stare at
yeah,
it for
yeah,
10
no,
minutes.
I wasn't there. I was appreciating the horse, right? And that's how it shows up for me, because it does kind of show up different for everybody.
Yeah.
But I do remember, I got I got diagnosed in the midst of COVID. And I remember when I was talking to the diagnostician, it was over the phone. And I broke down crying. I was like thinking about that kid that didn't feel like she belonged and that nobody understood her, and going, it's not actually a problem with you. It's more just that their brains work differently and it can be okay. And it was like grief, acceptance. It was like a whole bunch of emotions all in one. And I think when I've talked to other people, not on a podcast or anything, like, that moment is all different for everybody. Like it doesn't have an exact pattern. It can be, like you said in your case, comedy, or in like my case, it was grief. But it was kind of wild to think back, to all those moments that I had been weird, abnormal, whatever that is. For those who are listening, just the audio version, we're using air quotes, but it doesn't really, like, those things are just concepts that are constructs made by society that don't actually mean anything. I think there's actually a lot more people that are neurodivergent in some shape or form, and we're just discovering and getting to the surface of that. So, when I think about that, I get super interested for all of us to kind of compare notes and go, oh, like, what's it look like for you? Like,
When your husband sends you to the store to get something, do you come back with it?
I
Probably
mean,
not
I
if you're
do,
me. Oh, no.
because I make notes because I've learned. And it's weird. I didn't give this to you as a question ahead of time, but like, have you gone back and looked at all the things that you do now as like a coping mechanism, and
Yeah.
realize, oh shoot, I do that because, of ADHD?
Oh, 100%. Like literally the joke with my husband is he's going to send me to the store for something and I'm not going to bring that back, but I will bring home 7 plants, 2 dogs, literally anything else under the sun. And he'll be like, "So did you get a watering hose?" And I'll be like, "No." Was I supposed to? Like I didn't even go to Home Depot. Was that on my list? So he's now actually learned that he has to text me literally anything he needs from me, or one thing for me that's been kind of a struggle, and I guess it's more of like a coping mechanism maybe for my husband, is I am so forgetful. Like sometimes it's a great thing. And sometimes it's awful though, because we'll have like a very serious conversation about 3 days later. He'll bring it up. I'll be like, "What? What are you talking about? We never talked about that." And he's like,
Oh,
"Yes, we
so
did." And I'm like, "Oh, sorry."
here's the joy, Tara. My husband has ADHD.
So you guys are just squirrels at raves all over the place.
Both my kids have ADHD.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
Our
I
our
would love to
household
hang
is
out in your house.
chaos. Yeah, it's chaos. And it's funny because, you know, it was like a domino of who
Mhm.
got diagnosed when, and he was the last one to get diagnosed. Was both my kids. So my other son actually his shows up like mine, and he's very, lost, can't pay attention in class,
Yeah.
always has that note on his report card. Very smart, just would apply themselves, they'd reach their potential, right? Like, which was
Yep.
like every report card growing up.
Mhm.
um but for my husband, it shows up completely differently for him, and he's definitely the one who will forget. I'll tell him something, I'll bare my whole soul, and then wait, what?
What was that? I won't be looking at him and he'll be like, "Did you hear everything I said?" No, I
No.
I didn't. Unless
Yeah.
like he's learned, unless I'm looking him in the eye, and so have my friends and other people, I'm I literally hear nothing because I'm looking at the 17 other things happening around me,
Yeah.
and I'm trying to focus on you, but like make sure I'm actually focused on you. And it's actually worked in my husband's favor too, which is really kind of funny. He loves to remind me of when we started dating. I mean, this was almost 10 years ago. Um the second gift he ever got me were tickets to a concert. And it
Oh,
was Blink 182 and A Day to Remember, who are two of my favorite bands ever. And he told me 3 times he bought these tickets for my birthday, and I forgot every time. And he's like, "It's awesome. It is like Christmas morning every time telling you we're going to this concert again." He's like, "Oh," you're like, "Oh my God, they're going on tour together." He's like,
that
"Literally
definitely
every
should have
time."
been a sign, but
You'd think. I was diagnosed shortly after that. So
okay, to be fair, yeah. So, like, working in tech for me has kind of like made me focus on what coping skills I can build, because like we didn't talk about this ahead of time, but medicine doesn't work for me. And that's a choice that for other people I think is works great. For me, all the coping mechanisms I built up over time, they disappear when I take medicine. So then I become a completely different person, and I don't want to do that right now. Maybe later, but right now I'm just too involved with things on the day to day to teach somebody the new language of what it's like to deal with me in this state. But so, when you think about it though, tech lends itself very well, even if you're not medicated, to shiny, right? So maybe not as a service manager because you're guiding people, but if you were a technician or like in the role that you have now, right? I feel like maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like it kind of fits well. There's certain things that you can do that will kind of be a good fit for ADHD. Is that what you found?
yeah, I actually think working in tech and the MSP space in general has been great for me with it, because no 2 days, and even like, I mean, no 2 hours really are ever alike,
Yeah.
honestly. And that works great for people who love contact switching. And as much as I hate multitasking, I love that quick hit of like adrenaline and dopamine. I know you and I talked about that yesterday. We were both
Yeah.
having some off days.
Yeah.
But you needed that like quick hit. And I think tech gives us that a lot. But on top of that, we work in an industry that's constantly changing.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't know how it presents for other people, but I know for myself, I get bored very easily.
Yep.
And so being in an industry that's literally, I mean, every day is something new is coming out, something, the vulnerability this week. I mean,
Oh
just
yeah.
something. And it's like, oh, something new and shiny for me to now pay attention to over here. I think it has worked really well. And when you find other people that work in tech, that I've noticed not a lot of people have been diagnosed, but I look at them and I'm like,
Yeah, but yeah.
hey, hello, my friend.
Yeah.
I promise
I think we're probably
there's
thinking
not a
of similar
stigma.
people too.
Like we're trying to get rid of the stigma around it. Like I promise.
Well,
But
I
no,
think I think
I
too,
love it.
like any bit, like they say, actually say the statistics show that people who have their own business are more likely to have ADHD or be neurodivergent because you do have to constantly change the path of what you're working with, right? So tech is similar no matter what role you're in, to me anyway.
Yeah.
But I think, you could find that across a bunch of different fields. And I feel like one of the things that I really hope for with people who are listening to this is, think about the field that you're in and think about how you could apply the ability for someone to be able to switch lanes and improvise and, just be able to adapt to whatever's in front of them as a positive thing, right? That you talked about the stigma just a few minutes ago. A lot of people think of, that kid that's hyper, eating sugar and, going off the rails, but there's actually things that are kind of beautiful about it and that are definitely strengths.
I would completely agree. And I've thought about this actually a lot because I was on another podcast recently and I want to say it was Connor's mom from Finn asked me about my superpower with ADHD. And I didn't really even answer at that point. And I've thought about it more and more. And I'm actually like hyper intuitive. You d- don't, I read body language and I didn't realize other people didn't pick up subtleties like I do.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that's huge, and especially if you're in a leadership role, that was something I leaned into so heavily when working. I mean, I still work with so many different, personality types. I work for 2 companies right now. And then I also find that, like, you have high energy and enthusiasm, especially if it's something you like doing. So
Yeah.
I get hyper focused and I can do something for 8 hours, and that was never something I was told happened with ADHD. People are like, "Oh, no, you can't focus." And it's like, "No, no, if I like it, I will go
Oh, I
down that
can.
rabbit hole."
It becomes my whole personality. I'm
Literally.
like knee deep in it. It's like
Yeah.
my life now. And, it is what it is, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's been awesome because with switching roles into EmiBot, I'm getting to use my creative side again. And so I'm having so much fun with that. But I mean, I will be on Canva for 12 hours straight. And my husband will be like, "Did you eat today?" I'll be like,
Yeah.
"No. What day is it?" Like, I
Yeah,
don't
I
even
hear
know.
that. I'm the one who does event stuff for our MSP. So,
Yeah.
we've got Employee Appreciation Day coming up, and so we always do something, but it's entirely me. And I always get questions like, "Do you need help? Like, this is a lot to take on." I'm like, "Nope, I'm
Nope.
fine. I'm good. This is a
Nope.
speed run it, and it'll be completely fine, and it's all in my head. And if I have to stop to explain it to you, it's going to take too long."
Yep. Yep. And then I'll be on to the next thing. And then it's just going to be a mess.
And
So,
then I'll get annoyed. And that's just, it's funny because I do find, and maybe you found the same thing when you do run across other people that have ADHD as well, you almost like talk faster. You start using a shorthand because they're
mhm.
going to get it, right?
Yep.
Like it's like a
100%.
club.
One of my really good friends, actually, I'm pretty sure all we do is talk in memes and gifs at this point, and it's all about ADHD. And she's like, "I am so glad that you're my friend." She's like, "Because I don't have anybody else I can talk to about this, but you understand what's going on in my brain." Like,
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's like a language, it's like a shorthand, and if you have somebody else that that can take that warp speed journey across all the webs that you're thinking of, they'll get there, and maybe from a different angle than you, but they'll get
mhm,
there, and you'll kind of arrive in a similar space, and it's kind of nice to have. I've kind of picked out some people around me that I think also have ADHD, but I'm not going to tell them that because I don't want to say go get diagnosed because these are people I work with, so
oh,
it's a little bit different. My friends,
yeah.
though, it's funny that you mentioned that your best friend has that because my best friend also is diagnosed with ADHD, and I was like, it makes a lot of sense now. Like,
Mhm. Why
it
our
is what it is.
personalities are so similar and why
Yeah.
we have very similar mannerisms. I'm like, "Oh, we apparently have very similar signs of how it, like, projects itself out of us." So,
Well, she actually is quite different than the way I was. I met her in high
oh.
school,
Mhm.
and the way that we made friends was similar. It was kind of like I don't know, this doesn't want to sound creepy, but kind of like a water cooler moment. Like she looked up at me at one point. She was like, "Oh, you're new," and because I was started brand new at a new high school,
Mhm.
and I don't know, she just was a very introverted person, but decided to talk to me. I don't know if she could just like sense it from afar or something.
She's like, "We're kindred." I know.
Yeah, I don't
Like,
know.
you described that and literally I was just thinking of like a John Hughes moment where like you're across the cafeteria and
Yeah.
there's like 80s music playing and there's probably a side
Well,
ponytail.
I wasn't in high school in the 80s, but
90s, but John Hughes was in the 80s.
yeah,
I was
yes, no, but I do know the frame of reference.
I
Um,
was barely born in the 80s. So,
yeah,
but I still love it.
I'm no, I was born in the 80s, just not in high school in the 80s.
Yeah.
Thankfully, because I think that would have been a wild time. But that's also an amble that we could go on down. But we're not going to do that because
Let's
we're
not.
almost done here. But I guess if I was going to ask you, like, just based on what we were talking about before, if there was one piece of advice that you could give to a company or an employer, who might have somebody who's ADHD on their staff or might be considering hiring someone that would help them set up, the workplace to be successful for them, what kind of advice would you give them?
Oh, that one's a hard one. So I would probably uh, so our companies are built around just like a really great culture. So when I was first diagnosed, the two first people I told after my boyfriend at the time and my family were my bosses. Because I was
Hmm.
like, I need you guys to understand this. And had we not had that open communication between the three of us, I don't know that I would have been so comfortable. And I've actually encouraged other people to do the same with their bosses that I've known that have gotten diagnosed in and out of this industry. And I'm like, they need to be able to kind of adjust for you
Yeah.
because for me, I get overstimulated if I'm taking in too much information all at one time. And now that they know that it's not me just being a not nice person, I'm not
Yeah.
going to curse on your podcast the first one, even though
Well,
that's
that'll
who
come
I am
later.
as a person.
I'm not going to
Um,
do it on the first one, but that'll
no,
come later.
I'll come back on the 150th episode and then it'll be the F bombs all around. No, I'm just kidding. But I mean, had I not had that relationship, like, I don't know that they could have accommodated me. And
Mhm.
they've seen me overstimulated and straight up sent me home. And they're like, we're not mad at you. We know that you need a break. And they've sent me to get massages. Like, they're like, we know where you're at right now and it's not going to be productive today. And that's okay. Come back, regroup, come back tomorrow, and we'll hit the ground running again. Because when we are productive, like we're highly productive.
Yeah. That
Yeah.
conversation is so important. I mean, it's kind of important from both sides. I'm the boss at my MSP. I'm
Yeah.
co-owner with my husband. And it was really strange, but also beautiful to me when we were in a huddle in the morning,
Mhm.
and I can't remember what exactly we were talking about, but I brought up very openly, just off the cuff, that I had ADHD, and that's the reason why I answered the way that I answered the question that came up.
Yeah.
And I was actually approached by two of my employees within 48 hours of me saying that, going, I just want you to know I also have this. And, identifying, I think, when you see and when we have these conversations and when we talk about it, it becomes more apparent and it makes it more okay, right? So, like when you're
Yeah.
in leadership, being vulnerable like that is really
Yeah.
important. And then on your end, being vulnerable as an employee and being like, I have trust in you as a boss. Hopefully you do. I don't know
I
if
do.
that's true for
Yeah.
everybody. I mean, I would say you do, but I'm
I
saying
do.
whoever's listening, right?
Oh,
But
I hope you guys do.
me too. I hope that for everybody, because you might be surprised the ways that they might tailor, and it's just little small changes that can happen that will set somebody up for success. Or in the case of hyperfocus, I think some places might want to hold you back a little bit, and if they understood that that's how your brain works, they're going to let you run because they know that you're going to be super productive in that moment, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's playing into people's strengths, right?
Yeah.
So I get hyper focused when I'm working on branding or event planning or name it, anything creative. And they've kind of let me run with that. And then it, something else, I guess, that we've implemented, and this was just, I implemented for myself and other people that I know in the space, is we do a lot of body doubling. So I don't know if you use that at all, but it's
No.
basically a temporary accountability partner. So
Okay.
if there's something, I actually have it in like my meeting link, and I am always like open to body doubling with anybody. Basically, you go into this meeting, it's like 90 minutes to 2 hours, and you're going in with something you want to accomplish by the end of it. And typically for me it's like, oh gosh, I have to do this thing for accounting. I hate accounting. I don't want to do it. So I push it off and off and off, and then I'll jump on a body doubling session, and me and the other person will walk in and go, okay, by the end of this 90 minutes I'm going to have this thing done, you're going to have this thing done. We don't even talk in it. It can be in person or it can be over a meeting like this. And we just kind of check in with each other, make sure the person's on task. Oh, you didn't go do that shiny object over here. You're still working on this. And then you check in at the end. And it's it's helped me a lot when I'm having those hard times focusing because I am medicated, but that's not the end all be all. You still have to
No.
do all these other things. And
Yeah.
that's one thing that's helped me like crazy.
Yeah, I mean, that could be a podcast in and of itself of all the different ways to cope with it because you're right,
Yeah.
medicine isn't the only thing. I mean, it's not it's very helpful for some people. I know that when I first tried it, the ability to focus on one thing at a time was almost terrifying. Uh, it was very like unmooring. But I think I've seen lots of people have like success with it, right? I think
Yeah.
I just think that anytime you can, talk about it. I mean, you're saying these words body doubling, but this isn't something that I would have identified as an actual coping mechanism until you said it, but we do something internally called thundercatting, where we'll all get in the same room and we might be working on different spokes of a project and we're really working in silence. We could have headphones on, but if there's one small piece of something that's a roadblock to getting the next part done, we're in the same room where we can turn around and go, hey, for this part, what do you think of this? And then I can just continue on because if they weren't in the room, I'd have to message them
Yep.
and then hearing back. And then I've had that hyper focus interrupted and anything could happen in that time frame. So I guess it's kind of like a version of what you're doing. But now I think you should be afraid because I might take you up on that and find it in your calendar.
Oh, please do. I'm always looking for body doubling partners. I have one over at another channel company, and then our service manager for our MSP. She'll jump on almost any time, or one of the owners. They're like, "Sure, I need to get something done." I'm like, "Cool."
It's funny. It's just like a small little question that you might have in the meantime that you can get answered, even if it's not related to what you're doing, just something that pops in your head.
Yep.
It gets rid of that intrusive thought out of nowhere, right? So then you can just keep focusing on what it is, because otherwise it'll just like turn in your
100%.
brain.
And then you start checking your teams, and then you're checking these other things because you got
Yeah,
distracted. So yeah, I
yeah,
love it. I suggest it for everybody, whether you
yeah.
have
That's a great
ADHD or not.
suggestion. Super appreciate that. I don't know about Tara, but I feel like she would say the same thing. If anybody's listening to this and you think this is you, and you have questions, I'm sure either one of us would probably answer it. And there's probably lots of other people in the community that once I post this that will, be like, oh, this is me too, or whatever. I think having these conversations is so important. Thank you so much for your time and willingness to be open about stuff that can be, I don't know, like a little uncomfortable for some people. Super appreciated.
Absolutely. I told someone recently that they thanked me at Pax 8 peer groups recently for posting things like this and talking about it. And they're like, one of your posts I took to my therapist and was like, this is me, like to a
Yeah.
T. And I was like, if it helps one person, I'm going to keep talking about it because I don't want people to feel like I felt when I felt weird being diagnosed as an adult, where I was like, oh, I don't know anyone that has this. And then suddenly I'm like, oh, I
Yeah.
know a ton of people that do.
Yeah, the loneliness part of it can be an interesting factor when you feel that like other, and I don't think anybody wants to feel like that. So
No.
hopefully if you're listening to this, you've gotten a little something about, what it's like, and you maybe understand somebody in your life who has that, or maybe you need to talk to your doctor, whatever it is. I just want to thank you again for your time, Tara.
Of course. And I am looking forward to coming back on at what did I say, episode 150, and
Yeah,
it'll
that,
be
that was
the
right.
F bomb fest.